Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad-Gita as it is, chapter 8, entitled Attaining the Supreme, and sloka number 3. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Aksharam Brahma Paramam Svabhavo-dhyatman Uchyate Bhuta Bhavo-bhavo Karu Visarga Karma Sangitaha. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Aksharam, indestructible, Brahma, Brahman, Paramam, transcendental, Svabhavaha, eternal nature, Adhyatmam, the self, Uchyate, is called, Bhuta Bhava Udbhava Karaha. Producing the material bodies of the living entities. Visargaha, creation, karma, fruit of activities. Sangitaha is called. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruit of activities. Please repeat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruit of activities. So purport. Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman there is Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter. But in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. In the Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Para-Brahman. The living entity, Jivatma, takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies himself with matter. And sometimes he identifies himself with the superior, spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 8,400,000 species of life. But in spiritual nature, he has only one body. In material nature, he is manifested sometimes as a man, demigod, animal, beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifices, yajna. But when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. This process is called karma. The Chandogya Upanishad describes the Vedic sacrificial process. On the sacrificial altar, 5 kinds of offerings are made into 5 kinds of fire. The 5 kinds of fire are conceived of as the heavenly planets, clouds, the earth, man and woman. And the 5 kinds of sacrificial offerings are faith, the enjoyer on the moon, rain, grains and semen. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman. Thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice, and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna-conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. Impersonalist commentators on the Bhagavad-Gita unreasonably assume that Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world. And to substantiate this, they refer to chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But in this verse, the Lord also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the Supreme Lord Achyuta never falls down. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahman assumes the form of Jiva is not reasonable, acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman, the living entity, is distinguished from Para-Brahman, the Supreme Lord. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Malitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandayaham Shri Guruho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrijatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti-Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Aksharam Brahma Paramam Swabhavo Dhyatman Ujyate Bhuta Bhavod Bhavo Karo Visarga Karma Sangitaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruit of activities. Hare Krishna. So this is quite a technical part of the Bhagavad-Gita. This is the beginning of Krishna's response to Arjuna's questions, his first 3 questions. In the beginning of the 8th chapter, Arjuna had said, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruit of activities? These 3 questions are being answered today. But we should also understand why Arjuna suddenly asked these questions, which are very technical, when Krishna is wanting him to fight. But these questions actually come from what Krishna has said in the end of the 7th chapter. In verse 729, he talked about these 3 items that Arjuna asked about. And in 730, he talked about the 3 that will be answered in tomorrow's question. So in verse 729, Krishna had said, Jara marana mokshaya mam astritya yatanti ye te brahma tadvidu krishnam adhyatmam karma kachakilam. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. So, Srila Prabhupada spoke on this portion of the Bhagavad-Gita very early, in 1966. He gave a class on a number of verses. It was from 728 all the way through to 8.6. But there are some places where Srila Prabhupada is explaining why we could study this and what the benefit of studying it is. And because we know that we're trying to engage in devotional service, we're not trying to become jnanis. But Srila Prabhupada nevertheless has quoted in his purport from the Chandogya Upanishad about this very elaborate process of sacrifice and elevation. So he's explained in this class. This was the previous class, this first quote. He says, so this is our disease. When we go to a swami, when we go to a temple, when we go to a church, our heart is filled with material desires. We want some material profit from it. We practice yoga just to keep the health fit. That's all. For keeping the health fit, why do you take shelter of yoga? You can do material exercises to keep the health fit. But no, people decide, and Prabhupada quotes 720, karmas taistar ritagyana, which means their knowledge is stolen. That material desires, I want to keep myself fit to enjoy life. Let me take this yoga. Let me go to church. Let me have a swami as my spiritual master, order supplier. So Srila Prabhupada has explained further that people will go to the sannyasi because they've got some pain. Somebody told a story recently in class Prabhupada was on a train. He was in a first-class compartment, and his disciples were trying to keep it private so he could take his own time. But of course, because he's a sannyasi, everybody wants to come and get their blessings. So all these people, but the disciples were guarding the door, but there were two people outside who were very, very determined. And they knew if they caught Prabhupada's eye, he'd have to let them in. So they kept trying and trying to see their way through the door. And eventually they caught Prabhupada's eye, so he said, okay, come in, knowing that they just asked for blessings. So these two came in, and they said, Swamiji, give me your blessings. And Prabhupada said, he looked around and he said, you see these devotees? My blessing is that you'll become like them. And they said, no, Swamiji. And then Prabhupada said, well, so what kind of blessing you want? And the guy says, oh, my back's sore, my hip's sore. And everybody looked at him. Okay, my wife needs some help, my children need to go to college. And everyone looked at him again. And so eventually Prabhupada said, okay, this is your blessing. My blessing is that you'll become like these people. No, Swami, no. So Prabhupada is explaining that, okay, it costs more money to go to the doctor. So let me just go to the Swami and ask for some blessings. It's cheaper than going to the doctor. So in that way they will go and ask for blessings instead of asking for transcendental knowledge. So they inquire that, what is the use of becoming Krishna consciousness? What is the use? So this verse 728, Srila Prabhupada says is the answer. Lord Krishna replies that question, why? Jara marana mokshaya mam asricha yatantite. So jara marana mokshaya. In order to get rid of the material miseries caused by jara, which is old age. Now Srila Prabhupada talks about today's verse in the following class, a following class. There's several classes missing in between. It goes from October 12th to October 20th or something. So Arjuna Vacha, today's verse. Kim Brahma Kim Atyadmanam. Oh, this is the verse 1, the question. Kim Karma Purushottama Adi Bhutam Chaking Proktam Adi Devam Kim Uchate. Now this is very technical terms, Srila Prabhupada is explaining. What are these technical terms? The first term is Brahma. What is Brahman? That is Arjuna's first question. Next question, Adhyatma. What is the spirit? Adhyatma. And the next question, Adibhutam. Like this. Very complicated questions. Prabhupada is trying to explain people in 1966, they've hardly started learning the philosophy. Well, all these technical terms in Sanskrit. So he says, so Krishna is answering very, very gradually. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. Bhagavan Uvacha means Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what is the answer? Aksharam paramam brahma swabhavo dhyatman uchyate. Aksharam paramam brahma. Now Aksharam means infallible. Infallible. Paramam means supreme. And Brahma means indestructible. Brahman. Indestructible, or which is eternal, that is called Brahman. Now eternal, we are eternal. This is explained in the second chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. Na hanyate hanyamane sharire. Bhagavad-Gita 2:20. We do not die even after the destruction of body. So we are Brahman. Brahman means indestructible and eternal. Some matter may be indestructible, but it is not eternal. Matter is never eternal. Therefore, these two things to be understood about Brahman: indestructible and eternal. And further he says, these technical terms one should know, but it requires a very long description. We have to give our attention with separately understanding. Generally, we would like to take it out. So, he's explaining why we should know these things. Why do we have to know what is Brahman, what is Adhyatma, what is Karma? So he quotes further on to 8.5, and a couple of days we'll get there. Antakali cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram Ya prayati samadbhavam yati nyasyatya samsayaha. So the critical point is antakale. So when you want to become Krishna conscious, the result comes antakale, at the time of death. So you have to know what to do. You have to understand this process. We have to understand from a higher authority. As said, Mahajano yena gata swapantaha. Try to follow the higher authority. And Krishna is that higher authority. So Srila Prabhupada explains that this Bhagavad-Gita, it is a science. We discuss this Bhagavad-Gita only for the understanding that we are not blindly following a principle. It is a science. It is based on philosophy and science. But we have made the process easy. That's all. By following the great stalwart personalities. But not blind following. It is based on philosophy and science, Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada then goes on to explain that you can understand something by science, but it can also be understood by direct experience. And he gives the example of a fire. The scientist may examine fire and say, okay, by this method, by the combination of oxygen and some energy, this fire is produced. And he can understand it. And the child may not understand it. But both of them, if they touch it, they will get burnt. So the direct experience is there. So really this technical description in the Bhagavad-Gita is just to help to bring us to the point of faith. Whoever touches the fire, whoever engages in the process, they will get the result. But if you want to understand by philosophy or science, Prabhupada says, we've got ample stock in the Bhagavad-Gita. So the three questions that are being answered today. What is Brahman? Just in brief, Krishna tells Arjuna that Jiva is Brahman. That's our spirit soul. So Prabhupada writes, Brahman is indestructible and eternally existent, but its constitution is not changed at any time. Beyond Brahman there is Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to living entity, Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what is Adhyatma? What is the self? This is also explained in the verse itself, Swabhava. So further on, Baladev Vidyabhushan analyzes these questions and he puts in a comment about this word Adhyatma. This is Adi, not Adi. We have Adi as in Adi Purush, and this is Adi. So this Adi means more or over or above. So in some way it means the original source, or the source above. So that's why it's been described as being the eternal nature of the soul, as opposed to the temporary nature of the soul. So Adhyatma, in the verse it's called Swabhav, one's own nature, one's real transcendental nature. In other places, Adhyatma is explained in 330 as full knowledge of the self. It's explained in 13:8 to 12 as pertaining to the self, and it's explained in 15:5 as being in spiritual knowledge. So this Adhyatma means transcendental knowledge of the self, of the Brahman. And then the third question is, what is karma? So Srila Prabhupada gives quite an extensive explanation of karma. We know karma means activities, but further than that, karma means prescribed activities. Because activities that are not prescribed become vikarma. They become sinful activities. And Prabhupada writes the whole process about from the Chandogya Upanishad. But it's actually the same process that's described in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. From 3.9, Yagyatat karmano nyacha, loko yam karma bandhanaha, tad artam karma kontaya, mukta sangha samachara. Work as a sacrifice to Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in the material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction. In that way you will always remain free from bondage. Text 10. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods with sacrifices for Vishnu and blessed them by saying, Be thou happy by this yajna sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. And it's further described in detail here in 3:14. Anad bhavanti bhutani parajanyad anasambhavaha yagyad bhavati parajanyo yagya karma samudbhavaha. All bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. So this is the process that's been described in the purport in today's verse, from that verse from the Chandogya Upanishad. I shall try to explain it. It was described in the Bhagavad-Gita notes with a diagram. So Prabhupada has said in the Chandogya Upanishad, on the sacrificial altar, there are 5 kinds of offerings made to 5 kinds of fires. Prabhupada in the following purport has briefly described how the living entity makes sacrifices in order to attain the heavenly planets. So the first kind of fire is the heavenly planets. And the first offering is faith. So by faith, the living entity engages in the sacrifices and attains the heavenly planets. So on attaining the heavenly planets, he then gets to enjoy. And the next offering is the enjoyer on the moon. So as far as I can make out from this description, this enjoyer on the moon means that when the living entity has got to the heavenly planets, we know he can enjoy. He can drink the Soma Ras and he can enjoy on the heavenly planets. But the end of his time on the heavenly planets, he then has to go further. So in this way, it becomes the second offering, becomes the enjoyer on the moon is offered to the clouds and therefore comes down in the rain. So as the rain comes down, it becomes the next offering. So the rain coming down is the third offering, and it is offered to the earth. The rain offering to the earth then produces food grains, and those food grains become the next offering, which is offered to man, and the man then produces semen. So the semen becomes the next offering, which is offered to the woman. So in that way there are 5 kinds of fire described are the things that are being offered to, and the 5 kinds of offering are the faith that he has in order to attain the heavenly planets. The enjoyer on the moon gets offered to the clouds in order to produce rain. The rain gets offered to the earth to produce the grains. And then the grains are eaten by man to produce semen, which are offered to woman, which is the means by which he comes back down to the material world again. Okay. So Prabhupada says at the end of this cycle, the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes in the material path. So we know this isn't our goal, to come and go perpetually in the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on in this class is because we're quoting from the Chandogya Upanishad and this process of sacrifice. I wanted to discuss about Vedic authority because we have our process by which we can attain knowledge, which includes Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. And so I wanted to talk about, there are many people who think they don't need to belong to a parampara. Let me just take Google as my guru, and we can find everything on Google. So I wanted to mention how we can find so many of these things on Google, but we don't find them in the complete form. The Upanishads and even the Vedas have been translated. But I was listening to a class which described how this actually happened. So we know that Lord Buddha came to stop Vedic sacrifices because he found that the Vedas were being completely misused. And therefore he really wanted to stop Vedic sacrifices. People were just using the Vedas in order to kill animals and eat meat. So he brought in impersonalism, voidalism, which Prabhupada talks about in the last purport we'll try and get back to. And in this way he negated the Vedas and taught simply non-violence. So after that, Lord Shiva has come as Shankaracharya to try and reintroduce the Vedas. But he has reintroduced the Vedas in a form that can be understood by those people. Because the people had become they were so much misusing the Vedas, they were practically atheistic. And being atheistic, they weren't going to accept the personality of Godhead as he was described in the Vedas properly. So Shankaracharya came and he misrepresented the Vedas in order for people to accept them again. He said, no, God is not a person, God is impersonal, just worship the impersonal and do your duty according to the Vedas. So he tried to bring back an acceptance of the Vedas. And that was further challenged by Ramanujacharya and later Madhvacharya. And after that, beyond that even, I've got some interesting quotes here about when the British came into India. So there's one quote here, there's a newspaper clipping from 1835 from a Lord Macaulay who was in India, and he wanted to, because the system that the British used when they take over a country is that they want to introduce English language in order to destroy the local people's culture. And in India they found it difficult. In other countries they were quite successful. But here, this Lord Macaulay had been in India and he went back to England and gave his result. This came in a newspaper. Lord Macaulay's address to the British Parliament, 2nd of February 1835. I have travelled across the length and breadth of India, and I have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such calibre, that I do not think we could ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual and cultural heritage. And therefore, I propose that we replace her old and ancient educational system, her culture. For if the Indian thinks that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation. So this is, we understand this, but it's really surprising that they put it in the newspaper.
When was that, sorry?
This is 1835. So this was the government plan, and to take over India and control it is to destroy. We know later on they did even more. They incited they incited tension between the Muslims and the Hindus. Previously the Hindus and the Muslims were living peacefully. Even the Muslims would not eat meat just to respect their neighbours who were Hindus. But the British government incited this violence between the nation. So I was just came back. I was listening to a class from one of the devotees from Pune, and he added further to that story. This article I've had for quite some time, And he added further, they actually employed a Sanskrit scholar who was a German man to distort the Vedas. This man's name was Max Muller. He's a very famous Indologist. So they brought him in so that they could impose Christianity on the Vedas. So if you read on Google about the Vedic tradition, you get the words mythology, and the Vedas haven't been around that long, and so many of these stories. These were started by people like this Max Muller, because he wanted to impose Christianity in this country, so he distorted the Vedas. He said, this is a quote from him, "India has been conquered once, but India must be conquered again, and that second conquest should be conquest by education." He thought that the Indian culture was doomed, so therefore he wanted to impose the British culture. So he was employed by the British government. In a letter he wrote to his wife, it has been stated that he was employed to translate the Vedas in such a way that the Hindus lose faith in them. He was very qualified in Sanskrit. He translated and published the Indian stories called Hitopadesh. He published the Rig Veda in Sanskrit. There's a story also I heard in class where it's said that he has translated the whole Rig Veda, but our acharyas had verses that he didn't translate because he had selectively taken the verses that he wanted to present and presented it saying, "I've done the whole Rig Veda, you don't need to go anywhere else." He started the Brahmo Samaj movement, believing that it would be an Indian form of Christianity because he wanted to bring Christianity into India. Now, I don't know if that's the same as Arya Samaj, but it possibly may be. Okay, so here, in order to substantiate the biblical creation theory, he decided to establish that he looked at the Rig Veda and the establishment dates of Ramayana and Mahabharata, and they were very ancient. So he said, no, this can't be right, because according to Christianity, we haven't been around that long. So let me change it. Let me say it was only done a few thousand years ago. So you'll find speculation that this part of the Vedas was done this time because of this type of Sanskrit, and another type of the Vedas was done at another time because of another type of Sanskrit. So this was all done by this Max Muller in order to discredit the Vedas and their authority. Max Muller is said to be an agent of the British colonial rulers who funded him to write, rewrite and distort the history of Asia, to establish Christian history as superior to that of Asian history. So even they came up with an idea that the Aryan race came from Europe into India, instead of, as the Vedas say, it went from India out. So they did all this as well. So this is why it says, moreover, due to this distortion and mistranslation of Vedic scriptures rendered by many Indologists in the past, many people, including the local Hindus in India, assume that Hinduism is a collection of blind superstitions, meat-eating, horse-killing, animal sacrifice and caste system. So one Russian Indologist has commented on Max Muller. He says, what struck me in Max Muller's translation was a lot of absurdities, obscene passages, and a lot of what is not lucid. And he gives his own opinion. As far as I can grab from the teaching of the Vedas, it is so sublime that I would look upon it as a crime on my part if the Russian public becomes acquainted with it through the medium of a confused and distorted translation, thus not deriving for its soul that benefit that this teaching would give to the people. So that I wanted to bring in because this section is very technical and we're talking about the authorities of the Vedas. So Prabhupada is saying that we need to try and understand this part of the Bhagavad-Gita because we should understand the authority of the Vedas and not just accept it as a blind following, as some of these people would have us believe. Now, what else did I have in mind? Yeah, so I think we've covered most of that material there. So I'll stop now and see if anyone has any comments or questions in today's class.
I have a technical question about the Aryans.
Yeah, can you just pass that microphone behind you, Prabhu?
Yes, a technical question about the Aryans. You said that they went from India to Europe, yeah?
Ah.
So, who are they really?
So this comes, if you read in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it was the sons of King Yayati who gradually took different parts. Originally, the entire earth, the entire Bharatvash, the earth was called Bharatvash. The whole earth was called Bharatvash, not just India. And it was ruled by the saintly kings. They ruled the whole planet. In previous times, like we have Prithu Maharaj, Priyavrata, so many kings, even Bharat Maharaj was ruling the earth. But at the time of King Yayati, he's the king who wanted to regain his youth because he wanted to enjoy with his wife. And so he had trouble with his sons who didn't want to exchange their youth for his old age. And only the youngest son was pleasing him. But it ended up that the other sons went to different areas all over the earth, and they took different positions. So from there we have the Yavanas, who like in Greek and Arya. And Arya in Sanskrit, the word Arya simply means followers of the proper Vedic Sanskrit behavior. Arya is not a race, it's a way of behaving. So saintly people are becoming Aryan. Like in the Bhagavad-Gita, in the second chapter, Krishna says to Arjuna, you're being un-Arya, you're being un-Aryan. You're not behaving in an Aryan way. So Aryan is about how you behave, to be a proper gentlemanly behavior, to act according to your duty, and to not become attached to material enjoyment. So Arjuna wanted not to fight because he didn't want to kill his relations and friends, because he thought he couldn't enjoy the kingdom without them, because he didn't want to kill his teacher, because of so many material relationships. And Krishna had said, no, this is un-Aryan, so your behavior is un-Aryan. So it's not that Aryan is a race. Of course, Hitler wanted to call his people Aryans, so he changed everything around to suit that. But actually Aryan is a way of behaving, and his Aryans were not Aryans.
What about the color of the skin? Were they white?
Yeah, no, it's not about the color of the skin. How skin color works, I really don't know. If you look at everything about people's bodies, there's so much similarity and so little differences. Like especially with the people in the Indian bodies, the whole like bone structure and everything is the same as us in white bodies. There's not differences. Like you can say that Chinese people, they have a different body type. The Asian people have a different body type. The island people have different body types. But the Indian body type and the European body type is practically the same. Only the skin color is different. So it may just be because of the history of we were living in a place where the sun didn't shine. I don't know. I'm not a historian, and neither do I think there's any Vedic authority on that. But if you look around you, you'll see it's quite interesting.
Not because I found any importance in the difference of colors of the skin and anything, but because very often the images of the sages and everything, they're white all the time. You might
Yeah.
go to Rasta.
So yeah, I mean, Lord Chaitanya is described as golden. So when they depict him, they picked him with a lighter skin color. And actually, when they made the Panchatattva in Mayapur, They actually made them all out of 5 different blends of material, metals, to get the different colors, because they're all described in the scriptures as being slightly different color. But yeah, amongst some people there is a perception that light skin is better, but actually it's not based on anything, really.
So Aryans came from the descendant of King Jayantha, you said?
Well, yeah, I mean, originally the whole earth was ruled by the same people. So these people are all over the earth. But eventually the governorship, the rulership broke up. Because underneath the saintly kings there were more kings. And so eventually they took different positions.
And the Greeks are descendants of...
Yeah, that's... everybody is in some way or another. But there are, described in the Vedas, there are 8,400,000 species of life, of which 400,000 are human species. So there are 400,000 different human species, which includes species that we don't know of, like demigods and demons. But there are 400,000 different species. So Aryans basically are ones that follow Aryan culture, which means that they act properly civilized. And they don't act in Prabhupada described how if a human being simply engages in eating, mating, defending, and whatever the other one is, eating, mating, defending, and sleeping. Sleeping! These 4 activities are shared between animals and humans. So if the human only does those 4, then he's not really a human, he's an animal. It doesn't count as, he's a 2-legged animal. So to become an Aryan is to get beyond those 4 animalistic activities and get to the higher self and start to search for self-realization. Sri Prabhupada said in today's purport that the devotee, he doesn't worry about these, even about these sacrifices, which are prescribed in the Vedas, but they're not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to go for self-realization and get out of this cycle of repeated birth and death.
So the Mlechas actually are descendants of Aryans as well.
Yeah, I mean, these groups are coming from, but they, yeah, but they degraded. They left the civilization and they degraded. The culture became degraded like that. Thank you. Anything else, or any corrections if you know better than me, because you might. All right. Thank you all very much for coming and attending the class. Hare Krishna.